Hey folks, David Stewart here. Coming March 27th, the keys to prolific creativity for those of you looking to improve your creative process and achieve your goals. Please check that out. $2.99 down below, but let's get to the subject at hand, which is prepping. Prepping for the coronavirus, beautiful Corona-chan, or really any natural disaster, any kind of emergency, any significant economic disruption to the normal way of things. The truth is, most people I meet are highly domesticated. They live in an urban environment. They don't have a lot of food on hand. They maybe eat out all the time. And any kind of disruption to that supply chain that delivers them food whenever they feel like having it is going to have a major impact on their lives. It's good to be prepared for that eventuality because it can happen. And we've learned this from Hurricane Katrina in particular. You don't want to be one of those people that is reliant on either the company or the government to come in and save you and give you bottled water because you just don't have any kind of emergency supplies on hand. You want to be well prepared. Now, if you're one of those people that's thinking about some kind of years-long economic collapse, like societal collapse, that's a totally different thing. I really just want to talk about the basic prepping stuff that you need in case of an emergency. I think Corona-chan's a great opportunity to just take stock at your general preparedness for things like that and to shore up any weak points. That's what I've done recently. My wife and I looked at what we had ready to go for emergencies and decided we were a little unprepared, so we shored up our weak points. And I happen to know that I was far more prepared than pretty much everyone else that I know. So I went ahead and just tried to be a little bit more ready for bad things to happen. Now, I don't think with coronavirus the big danger is like getting sick. I think a bigger danger really is the economic disruption that comes from the virus impacting all of these different areas of the world that we are dependent on, because we're very kind of global economy at this point. Everything's very interconnected. Disruptions to manufacturing in China will have effects here. Disruptions to the food chain or to the chain of supplies that deliver food to you could mean that either there's no food on the shelves or you're going to end up getting really gouged. So one of the points of preparedness, I'm talking about three big areas, but one of them is actually to avoid that price gouging. You don't want to be stuck having to pay $100 for a bag of rice because it's the only bag of rice left in town and you didn't happen to buy any food before the earthquake happened or the wildfire happened or the hurricane came. Now, I live in an earthquake area. For me, it's important to be prepared for emergencies, not just something like the coronavirus. So the three, I think, big goals when you're prepping is, number one, make sure that your family and yourself are safe and comfortable directly following some kind of disrupting event. If it's an earthquake or fire, or it's like a pathogen sweeping through an area and you need to stay indoors, that's what you want to make sure that first and foremost, you guys are safe and comfortable. The second one is to ensure that your family's going to be okay for some kind of longer term, weeks to months of, say, food scarcity or, power disruptions, things like that. And that does happen. I mentioned Hurricane Katrina. So with Hurricane Katrina, my grandparents didn't have power for weeks, and they lived in Texas. They didn't even live in Louisiana, but that had a major impact on them. So being able to make sure that you are going to be able to survive those bigger disruptions that happen with natural disasters, that's going to be good. And the third one is to ease any kind of survival concerns if there's a major disrupting event, like if you have to evacuate or something like that. And each of these things, you are going to be buying different things to achieve those goals. So with that in mind, my basic prepping recommendations, and I'll come up with a detailed list for another video. You want to make sure that you have something like a generator, especially if you live like I do in somewhere that can get very hot during the summer. And for me and my family, it's really important that we have a generator on hand because we have medically fragile elders in our family. And so if the power is out for a long time, as it has been happened last year, PG&E, in response to major liability with a wildfire, would just start shutting the power off to large sections of the state. And that's very dangerous here in the Central Valley, where it can get over 100 degrees. Sometimes really high, like 110 or 115. And if you have medically fragile elders, can't run the air conditioning, they're in trouble. So us being able to have, my in-laws come over and I can turn on the generator and run my portable AC to keep everybody cool, at least in one room, while the power is out for a couple of days, that's really important. So that's one of the things that I think is kind of a must-have if you have a house. If you live like by the beach, it's not as important because you don't have to deal with the temperature thing. But if power is not reliable, that's basically for anybody in California, generators are a really good thing to have. You should also have, to try to get to that number 2 one, making sure people are okay over the long term. You really want to have a sufficient food store, and it's really not that expensive to have a sufficient food store. You want to look for foods that don't require refrigeration, so that's going to be like dry rice or beans, prepackaged food like even graham crackers or Cheerios, which I keep on the shelf in the garage. That kind of stuff is really going to come in handy, not just in case there's nothing on the shelf at the supermarket, but if there is something on the shelf, it may be far more expensive than what you would prefer to pay. It's like, especially if you're going to eat rice anyway, just buy more rice, keep some of it in the garage, and you can eat it when you want to cook rice. And then if things get kind of tough or a disaster happens, you can just keep eating the rice that's in your garage for a long time without having to go buy more rice and pay out the nose for whatever rice happens to be left in the area as the supply chain gets disrupted. So you should have enough food to last at least a few weeks with comfortable consumption. We're not talking like survival conditions, comfortable consumption, meaning everybody's going to be eating more or less the calories that they need to just not lose a bunch of weight, right? Another one that you should have is essential medicine. This has to do with not just comfort, but that medium-term worry. So you should have your basic medicines like any kind of pain relievers, any kind of prescription meds. Of course, if you have diabetes, there's a problem in that you are going to, your medicine's going to lose effectiveness after a couple of weeks. So making sure that maybe you have a generator and can run that for however long you need to run it to keep the insulin refrigerated, that's probably going to be helpful as well. But you need to have all of your medicine squared away. If you can get extra prescription meds, like if you need albuterol or something, it's a really good idea to have at least one extra inhaler, a couple extra inhalers if you can, if you have those kinds of needs. This is one that people often forget, is water. So I always have a couple of flats of bottled water sitting around. And when I buy more bottled water from Costco, I take one of the older flats and I open that up to use those bottles of water for whatever I need. That way, that water's potable. It is storable for a long time. It's portable. So if you need to go somewhere, you can just take that water and throw it in a backpack and you'll be fine. And it's going to be very, very useful for drinking, just for staying hydrated. But it shouldn't be your only water source. You should also have, a couple big bottles of water maybe sitting around. And if an emergency happens and you have the ability to, say, get water out before the water is shut off, it's good to have just an extra trash can around that's clean, like a Rubbermaid trash can. You can just fill that full of water, and that can be 50 to 75 gallons of water supply for as long as you need it following a disaster. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And I think the last thing that I really would recommend people have is guns and ammunition. If you're one of those people that's like, I don't need a gun, I don't need ammunition, you need to get over yourself. You need to be able to protect yourself, protect your family. That means you should own at least one gun, and you should have sufficient ammunition for that gun. A lot of times, especially if you're in an urban environment, there's civil unrest following a disaster. There's looting and rioting. You do not want to be in a place where you cannot use a force multiplier to protect your family. So wherever you happen to be, never be unarmed. Always have something that you can use to protect yourself and protect your family. If you're anywhere that you can own a gun, you ought to have a gun. Everyone should own at least one. If you are wondering what kind of gun you should own, my recommendation is usually a 12-gauge shotgun to start. If you own no other weapons, 12-gauge shotgun is a great one, and that is because you can use different kinds of ammunition. It's a significant force multiplier. It can really do a lot of damage to a person. When you use buckshot, you can use birdshot to hunt birds on your own time or in an emergency situation. And of course, you can even fire slugs out of it. And they're usually pretty cheap. There's a lot of them around, and they're They tend to not be that expensive. If you get a pump action shotgun, they're pretty darn low maintenance as well. So that's what I recommend for everyone. Be well prepared. Now, for coronavirus in particular, safety goggles to keep spit out of your eyes, I guess, if you're going to go out and there's lots of sick people. And I have a bunch of respirator masks that I use for home improvement stuff that you could wear if you needed to go out and do that stuff. The main thing I want to point out here about any kind of list I make, and I'll make a list, I'll make a separate video that has a list just of a bunch of stuff that I have sitting around and stuff that I recommend. Nothing that I buy for emergency preparedness are things that I wouldn't use normally. So if I buy rice, it's because I eat a lot of rice. If I'm buying batteries, you use batteries, right? If you're buying, Cliff Bars or something like that, I eat Cliff Bars. So, just buy some extra to store in case you need to have some food on hand, in case you can't go to the market for a couple of weeks. And I always have at least 2 weeks of food inside my house, and then I have extra food outside my house. So anyway, that's my suggestions for how you should think about what you need to prepare for. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Obviously, if you're storing food for yourself, it's different than me. I pretty much have to store food and be prepared, not just for me and my family, my wife and my children, but also my extended family, because they don't really think along these lines. And I want to ensure their safety and well-being in the event of a natural disaster as well. So basic stuff. You can get that now. As long as Amazon is still shipping stuff, a lot of this stuff you can still buy off of Amazon, including safety goggles, respirators, latex gloves, or something else that you need. Now's the time to buy those things before they're gone off the shelves. If you go down to Home Depot, you could probably still get respirators rather than getting them at the drugstore or medical supply or something like that. So you can get them at Home Depot, but I've been seeing a lot of empty shelves at Home Depot. I know there's a lot of people thinking the same thing I was thinking, because I ran down to Costco to get, to just get some more dry goods, and like the rice was cleared out. So I know that I'm not the only one thinking this. If you haven't put those things away, a couple weeks worth of food at the very least, and have some kind of plan in mind for if power's out for a long time, then now's the time to do it. It's better to panic early rather than panic late, because if you panic late, you're either going to be having a tough time or you're going to be paying a lot of money in order to get what you need. So keep that in mind, and I'll see you guys next time.